Peace and power, family. I'm your brother, Entwade Mula, and that's an African name that just means he who greets with fire. Alright? We're going to talk about the old Jim Crow. Alright? This is the old Jim Crow 101. After the Civil War, free blacks were often charged with vagrancy. What is vagrancy? Vagrancy is the offense of a person not being able to prove at a given moment that he or she is employed, with a new and flimsy concoction dredged up from legal obscurity at the end of the 19th century by the state legislators of Alabama and other southern states. Okay, let's stop right there. Vagrancy was what? It was a lawful if you wasn't working, and we just heard myself say that this happened after the Civil War. So this was during Reconstruction. So who was working during Reconstruction? Anyway, everybody should have been charged with vagrancy. But let's move on. It was capriciously enforced by local sheriff and constables, right? A constable is a person holding a particular office, most commonly in law enforcement. So we have those people today that pass laws like Stand Your Ground, which have their little hidden meanings in them, where you can justify murder. Alright? We had constables putting together the 13th Amendment, which said that slavery was abolished unless you commit a crime. So now we have constables putting together laws like vagrancy to charge black people, innocent black people, who were unemployed during a time where everybody was unemployed, to put them back in prison, and it's all legal under the Constitution, the 13th Amendment. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Educated by mayors and notaries public, recorded haphazardly or not, adding court records, and most tellingly, in a time of massive unemployment among all Southern men, was reserved almost exclusively for black men. Once again, we have these police officers blowing black men and women heads off and being acquitted or not prosecuted at all. But then you will have a black cop, hypothetically, to do the same thing under the same terms, but that man will be punished and brutally penalized. So we see that these laws are held exclusively for certain ethnicities. You got that? In other words, it was illegal to be black, and the penalty was a prison sentence of hard labor. So this was going on after you had freed the slaves. Alright, you made it illegal to be black. Blacks who were jailed for vagrancy usually served a 30-day term of hard labor. But if blacks were unable to pay the array of court fees to the sheriff, the deputy, the court clerk, then their sentences were extended to nearly a year of hard labor. Understanding arrangement between the county and a vast subsidiary, which means controlled by another company, of the industrial titan of the North U.S. Steel Corporation. The who? The industrial titan of the North U.S. Steel Corporation. So the North was benefiting from the South putting black men and women back in slavery. The sheriff turned black men over to the company for the duration of their sentences. So, see, we had the North and South working together. So the South would catch them and sell them to the North. In return, the subsidiary Tennessee Coal, Iron and Railroad Company gave the county a $12 a month to pay off the black men fines. What the company's managers did with thousands of black men they purchased from sheriffs across Alabama was entirely up to them. So after you buy a black man, after you was leased a black man, black woman, what you did to them was entirely up to you. You know, almost like a temp agency right now. The company then put many of the blacks in a mine called Slope Number 12. Look this up, people. Where their daily task was to remove 8 tons of coal from the mine. This was their daily task. That ain't slavery. Blacks were subjected to the whip for failure to dig the requested amount, at risk of physical torture for obedience, and vulnerable to the sexual predations of other minors. So you have black men dealing with sodomy way back then, but all of a sudden, people are born gay. Nah, only people born gay was Caucasians. As you can see, that they were at risk of physical sodomy from these Caucasian minors. Before the year was over, almost 60 men was forced into Slope 12 were dead of disease, accidents, or homicide. Others were incinerated in nearby ovens used to blast millions of tons of coal brought to the surface into coke, the carbon-rich fuel essential to the U.S. steel productions of iron. 45 years later, after President Abraham Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation freeing American slaves, more than 1,000 black men toil under the lash at Slope 12. Imprisoned in what was then the most advanced city, Birmingham, of the South, guarded by whipping bosses employed by the most iconic example of the modern corporation emerging in the Gilded North. They were slaves in all but name. Emerging in the Gilded North. What does gilded mean? G-I-L-D-E-D. G-I-L-D-E-D. To give an often deceptively improved appearance. The Gilded North, so was deceptively improved appearance. What we have right now in 2015 with the black president. We have a gilded America, or a gilded black America. Okay? Douglas A. Blackman, a reporter of the Wall Street Journal, the author of the book Slavery by Another Name, explored what the blacks endured at Slope 12. Almost a century, 100 years later, Douglas A. Blackman thought to himself, what would be revealed if American corporations were examined through the sharp lens of historical confrontation as the one then being trained on German corporations that relied on Jewish slave labor during World War II, and the Swiss banks that robbed victims of the Holocaust of their fortunes. 2 rail lines in a complex of mines, coal processing facilities, and furnaces in which thousands of men operated the clock to generate millions of tons of coal and iron, all owned and operated by U.S. Steel at the height of its supremacy in America. Commerce. Commerce is the whole system of an economy that constitutes an environment for business. So the U.S. still came to fruition based off this system, this slave system. Okay, the labor camps had supplied tens of thousands of men over 5 decades, which is 50 years, to a succession of prison mines, ultimately purchased by U.S. Steel in 1907. Hundreds of black men did not survive. Are you surprised? They didn't survive the labor camps. Nearly all were black men arrested and then leased by the state and government officials to U.S. Steel or the companies it had required. This slavery did not last a lifetime and did not automatically extend from one generation to the next. But nonetheless, slavery, a system in which armies of free men, guilty of no crimes and entitled by law to freedom, were compelled to labor without compensation, were repeatedly bought and sold, and were forced to do the bidding of white masters through the regular application of extraordinary physical coercion. Coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. The laws passed to intimidate black men away from political participation were enforced by sending dissidents into slave mines or forced labor camps. So you see that? You go and try to vote and you were sent to one of these slave mines or forced labor camps. So that's how they coerced you to get away from that voting thing. And right now you have black men who are laced with felonies, coerced in these interrogation rooms by all type of large sentences and jail fines, and coerced into pleading to felonies where they will be banned or barred from voting. Okay? So let's move on. The judges and sheriffs who sold convicts to giant corporate prison mines also leased even large number of blacks to local farmers and allowed their neighbors and political supporters to acquire still more black laborers directly from their courtrooms. In Alabama alone, hundreds of thousands of pages of public documents attest to the arrest, subsequent sale, and delivery of thousands of blacks into mines, lumber camps, quarries. What is quarries? The difference between quarrying and mining would be that limestone is quarried, whereas the mineral lime is mined. Farms and factories. More than 30,000 pages related to debt slavery cases sit in the files of the Department of Justice at the National Archives. Altogether, millions of mostly obscure entries in the public record offer details of a forced labor system of monotonous in Normandy. Monotonous is when something goes on and on the same way for a long time, and enormity is the great extent of something perceived as bad. So the monotonous enormity. Okay, so altogether, millions of mostly obscure entries in the public record offer details of forced labor systems of monotonous enormity. So put it together. Instead of thousands of true thieves and thugs drawn into the system over decades, the records demonstrate the capture and imprisonment of thousands of random indigenous citizens, almost always under the thinnest chimera, which is a single organism compound of genetic distinct cells, of probable cause or judicial process. So basically the thinnest, reason. The total number of workers caught in this net had to have totaled more than 100,000, and perhaps more than twice that figure. So basically more than 200,000 freed blacks were caught up in this system. Okay? Instead of evidence showing black crime waves, the original records of county jails indicated thousands of arrests for inconsequential, not important, charges, or for violations of laws specifically written to intimidate blacks, charging employers without permission, vagrancy, riding freight cars without a ticket, engaging in sexual activity or loud talk, seen with white women, repeatedly. The timing and scale of surges in arrests appear more attuned to rises and dips in the need of cheap labor than any demonstrable acts of crime. Hundreds of forced labor camps came to exist, scattered throughout the South, operated by the state and county governments, large corporations, small-time entrepreneurs, and provincial, which means concerning the regions outside the capital city of the country, farmers. Crazy, right? These bulging slave centers became a primary weapon of suppression of black aspirations, where mob violence or the Ku Klux Klan terrorists terrorized black citizens periodically. The return of forced labor as a fixture in black life ground pervasively into the daily lives of far more blacks. By 1900, the South's judicial system had been wholly reconfigured to make one of its primary purposes the coercion of blacks to comply with social customs and labor demands of whites, which you have right now, 2015. It was not coincidental that in 1901 also marked the final fall disenfranchisement of nearly all blacks throughout the South. Prison sentences were handed down by provincial judges, local mayors, and justices of the peace, often men in the employ of white businesses, who relied on the force produced by the judgments. Dockets and trial records were inconsistently maintained. Attorneys were rarely involved on the side of blacks. So this was just an overview of the book by Douglas A. Blackman, which is called Slavery by Another Name.